All right, sweet. Well, hi everybody. Welcome to How to Not Suck at Storytelling, where myself, Rick Heinz, and a bunch of other illustrious, awesome storytellers are going to reveal to you our worst storyteller mistakes that we've ever made. And
Illustrious, I like that.
yeah, right. And how we've learned from this, because nobody, everybody who's run games or been storytellers or done these things for years, we've all kind of honed our teeth from gaming groups that have fallen apart. There's been drama, friendships have been broken apart. Sometimes games just weren't fun. Sometimes they're pretty boring. So we're going to have some stories about how we messed up, and then we're going to try to fix our own games, sort of on the fly, and see what we've learned from them. And before I get into like the theories of how this works or the different styles of storytelling, let's do some quick introductions. We'll go from left to right on my screen. So we'll start with Dave Walters. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hey, no, the best part about this like new Zoom world that we live in is no two of us have the same setup. So people be like, oh, okay, I'm done. Yeah, okay. Okay. And everybody's like, oh, it's me. Yeah, B. Dave Walters. I play Victor Temple on Vampire the Masquerade, LA by Night, a show with a storyteller of some repute. I also am the storyteller for Vampire the Masquerade Long Beach by Night. And I guess I can say publicly for the first time right now at this exact second, I'm going to be doing an Anarchs of New York 4-shot series for Level Up Dice starting this coming week. And I've been playing horror games since the World of Darkness started in the mid-90s.
Cool. What's your favorite clan besides Venture?
What do you mean besides Venture?
Are there other clans?
I'm like, You're like, if you don't want the best, what else is good? I will say Anarchs of New York has caused me to develop a new and deep appreciation for Clan La Sombra.
All right. Next, Jason, you're the next one in screen. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Great. Hey, I'm Jason Carl. I'm the brand marketing manager for the World of Darkness. I've been involved in tabletop RPGs most of my adult life in some way or another. And I'm delighted to be living in this new Zoom-focused world of ours where we can talk in ways that we never could before with everybody in our community about what we really love most. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, of course. What's your just real quick? What's your favorite Wraith class? I gotta hit you up on this, Jason. Your favorite in Wraith the Oblivion. What's your favorite?
Boy, for me in Wraith, it's all about the shadow.
Okay, fitting for the horror con.
See how I didn't really answer your question?
I know, completely dodged entirely. But it's right.
Unfulfilling. Yep.
See, that's Wraith. You can get what you said you wanted and still not be happy.
Ouch, right to the heart. Next, we're going to go to Joshua.
Hey, I'm Joshua Allen Deetch. I too have been playing horror games since about the mid-90s. I've written for tabletop games like Vampire the Masquerade, Vampire the Requiem, Scarred Lands, Pugmire, and the upcoming They Came from Beyond the Grave. I've also done some video game writing for The Secret World, Age of Conan, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and a few other small games. But yeah, I've been doing the tabletop game playing since 89, 90, 1990 maybe.
Oh crap. So did you ever play any LARPs or anything like that?
I did some Vampire the Masquerade LARPs. More recently, I did some work in Norway and met some LARPers out there, and I've gone to do some of they're really hardcore LARPs out in the Nordic countries. Yeah. Right.
Sweet. All right. And then Justin, you're next.
Yeah, I'm Justin Achilli. I was the line developer for Vampire the Masquerade from about the era of Revised in the late 90s up through working on Vampire 20th Anniversary Edition with Eddie Webb. back in 2010, 2011, and stayed on doing a couple of the kind of Kickstarter books that we first did with Onyx Path up until then. That's my cat, Vinny. I've been playing RPGs since before I was born, about 100 years ago. Much like Joshua, I'm working in video games now. So I've worked on Assassin's Creed in the past. I've worked on Star Trek property. I've done some VR titles, basically a little bit of everything, and a lot of fun stuff.
Awesome. What's your favorite small game to run, like obscure game that's not sort of whiteboard?
I wouldn't necessarily call it obscure. It was really big for a while, but I really like In a Wicked Age. It's kind of a sword and sorcery themed game, but it focuses more on the relationships between the characters, and it focuses on it's less about the sword fighting and more about what you mean to the world.
Sweet. Cool. I actually haven't heard of that one. I'll check it out. All right. And last but not least, who popped in, Crystal, you're up.
Hello. Sorry, I was coming from the Wrath and Glory play game. I am Crystal Mazur. I am a educator by day, and I'm a freelance writer and game designer. I've worked on Pip System for Third Eye Games, and I'm the line developer for Pip System currently. I worked on Chicago by Night, as well as Let the Streets Run Red. And I've done Never Going Home, Snowhaven, working for Black Void currently, and as well as the expansion for Snowhaven, Blood in the Snow, which is the Russian Revolution. So.
And you have your Owlbear mini, or your Bugbear mini?
You know what? I do, and I moved last weekend, so it's packed up somewhere, but I do have my little Bugbear mini somewhere.
When we get to stories, you're going first, so just so you know.
Awesome.
All right. So to everybody else watching, my name is Rick Heinz, and I write for Geek and Sundry. I took over the GM tips column on how to be like various storytellers, like various tips on how to do things. I'm also a writer of urban fantasy, the Seventh Age Dawn, which is all post-apocalyptic horror, which is kind of timely. I've been GMing forever and a day, just like everybody else on this panel. I've been a storyteller. I've been a GM. I've played Rifts, Cyberpunk, 10 Candles. Dread is one of my favorite systems. Wraith the Oblivion is the first game I ever played. That's why it's near and dear in my heart. And I had to ask that question.
You started with Wraith?
I started with Wraith. That was the first game I ever had.
That's hardcore.
That is a lot. That's a lot.
We were young, and we were in high school, and we were in chess club, and we got the first edition of Wraith the Oblivion, and we sat down and tried to figure out how to storytell it. 2 players by candlelight. It was one of the best games I ever had. And this all goes exactly into theory of why games fall apart as storytellers. And something that we've noticed after doing this panel and talking to GMs from around the world in different walks of life is there are different styles of storytelling. You have narrative style storytellings, which are, if you're a narrative GM or storyteller, you tend to be the kind of person who's going to pick up a book and run a campaign from beginning to end. You find this a lot in D&D, very structured narrative campaigns, and you have a story to tell, even if you write them down like beginning to end. It's kind of like walking your players through a book. And players sometimes very much like that dungeon crawl, right? Sometimes players, you have a player group that will sit on down and want to play this. And so you have this mix match sometimes where you could have a narrative GM and a bunch of players that want to play, more mind's eye theater and different types of things. And sometimes games fall apart. So you have narrative GMs, you have uplifting GMs, which tend to focus entirely on the characters' backstories. You have obstructionist storytellers that aren't I tend to be one. It's more like when players do something in the world, you kind of get a little Machiavellian, and then some consequence happens because of that, good or bad. And so the players kind of write their own plot, but it's like a living sandbox. And then there's experimental GMs like John Wick, who will rip up somebody's character sheet as they fail saving throws and things like that and break that immersion. Games like Dread tend to fall into that category because there's something tangible to touch and alter things. And throughout all of these panels, the biggest thing that we've noticed is that people, when storytellers and players have a mismatch, or storytellers step outside of their box, or try something new, sometimes it goes wrong when they crash against players and don't have the communication. So, with this thesis in mind, let's tell some stories about how we failed. I will go last, so I'm going to go with Crystal first. Crystal, tell us your story on how you failed as a storyteller.
All right. So, I run a weekly D&D game, and I've been running it for about 3 years now. And I had a bunch of old players from like 2nd and 3rd edition D&D, and I had a couple of brand new players who never played role-playing games before, and we were playing 5th edition. And I get together just a whole bunch of like small little go do this quest lines for a town that we're starting in for the world that I wrote. I did like a hack of a whole bunch of different worlds put together for our setting. And I got out my, monster manual, and I was looking through a whole bunch of stuff and picked out a whole bunch of, very easy starting monsters for the groups to kill, to go gather pelts or, go take care of a problem with kobolds and stuff like that. And one of them that I picked out was an owl bear. And I was like, okay, they can collect the pelts for these. It's a small town. They need it for winter coming up. Need to, to be able to create clothing and stuff like that for the townspeople. Makes sense. And I get to my game, and I present their quests and everything, and I mix up monsters, and I say bugbears instead. And I didn't realize it at the time. And we went through all the quests and all of that stuff. And they continued on, and we played for a couple more months. And I'm a fan of Critical Role. So I'm watching Critical Role, and they have bugbears come up. And I was like, oh, cool. I just used these recently in my campaign. And then one of them starts talking. And I realized that bugbears are humanoids. And I had them skin a bunch of bugbears to clothe a town. And to my horror, none of my players, even the old players, called me out on it. So we just kept rolling with it. And we haven't gotten yet to this point in the campaign yet, but in the campaign, there are consequences for actions. And one of them is that the bugbears in our world have now unionized. And are now in negotiations with that town to stop murdering them for their clothing.
Now, in this horrible element, correct me if I'm hearing you wrong here on the actual failure here is you didn't intend on your players to basically be a bunch of evil humanoids that went around and skinned things. So you found yourself now running a D&D campaign with a bunch of bad guys.
That's some Silence of the Lambs business going on right there.
I accidentally turned them all into Ed Gein, and not one person called me out on it. Not one person noticed even until much later. And yeah, and I was like, oh wow, I'm a horrible person. Wow.
So, how did you salvage the game to get it back on track to where you had originally wanted it to be? Because this was a case of arguably you would say just sort of a new GM and a new game system that you didn't know, right?
So one of the things was that I took it upon myself to kind of figure out, like where I went wrong on that, and that's not actually marking stuff down in my books. So now all of my GM's guide and my monster manual all have tons of little tiny post-it notes all over the place for me to go to, so I know exactly what monsters I'm using. But also it's kind of there's going to be a shared blame here, because I had players who had enough knowledge of the world, and their characters had enough knowledge of the world to understand that bugbears were humanoid and could have said something. but nobody did. So there is going to be some natural consequences within the world, and one of them is bugbears are unionizing, and
Right. I mean,
you know, like, and they're creating basically like sentient monster guilds because all these people are like, wait, we're getting murdered now, we never did before. so so there's going to be some real world balancing in there.
So, but you did one thing I think I really want to highlight here, and that's the topic of player agency, right? You said it yourself. Your players made the choice to go skin these bugbears, even though they knew fully well that they're humanoids, and they chose to go down that evil route, right? And actually do this. So player agency is ultimately one of the most paramount things as a storyteller that we have to like covet and watch. And you were able to salvage your game and keep it going. Everybody's had fun. You have consequences. You have bugbear unions now, and your game is still on track and a good time because of that failure. But just sort of embracing the choice that the players made, even though you sent them on this quest of rolling with it, right?
Yep.
So cool. And so with that being said, who we'll go with, so you hearing your stories, we'll go with Joshua next. So Joshua, tell us how you messed up as an ST.
Well, you just mentioned agency, so I'm going to tell you how I messed up with player agency. I was young, I was foolish. It was early days of gaming for me. We were running, or I was running a superhero game, and the players, I've always been like an uplifting kind of GM. Like I'll use the players' backstories, I'll dig into it. But early on, I was very railroady. Like I'd look at their stuff and then I would see scenes I want to happen and I would try and make them happen, even when I was forcing things too much. And we were playing a superhero game, and our heroes did something clever, which just completely negated the archvillain's henchmen. Quicker than I wanted. And I was at the time still getting used to running a game. I was, pulling from storytelling mediums that I knew, like novels, movies, things like that. And I was afraid of anticlimax. I was trying to avoid it. So my first mistake was I negated the player's agency by just throwing in the same amount of henchmen right after they negated them. And my compounding sin, that I'm embarrassed to say even now, is I just said it out loud. Like I'm like, oh, that was easier. And I thought, here's some more henchmen. And this was early days of online game playing. We didn't have Roll20, Astral, or Fantasy Grounds. I don't even remember what we were using, but it was really rough. So it was already a bit of a slog playing. It was a system that none of us really knew very well. So we were constantly looking up rules. So the combat itself was a bit of a slog, and I dragged it on more, and you could just tell the players just lost interest then, because they're like, oh, the story beats are going to happen regardless of what we do. Why, don't really need to put in much effort.
So what happened to the game after this? Because I mean, I know that feeling. The combat runs long. It's gruesome. Yeah,
it did not recover. We didn't actually do much online playing after that for a while. We got back into it with Roll20 and some of the other websites, but that particular game kind of stalled out.
Oh yeah, no, it happens. I mean, the average length of time, and if you guys are watching at home, and I mean, obviously it's because you're not here at a con or a panel, but the average game usually only runs about maybe 10 to 15 weeks before something happens to cause the game.
Right. I learned a lot from that game. I don't railroad things. I trust my improv brain now. I know even if I don't know where this is going to go, I will know eventually, or the players will help me figure it out. And the lesson was driven even further home a few years later. I played in a game someone else ran, a DM. She ran in a very different style. Wasn't as story driven, she'd let you play what you want, but she didn't really pull from your background so much. And the dice were the law, for her or the players. Like she would, if a die roll killed a villain that she had planned, then that's how it went. And it was a D&D game. We were all playing fiends of some type, depowered devils and demons cast into the material plane. And we had gotten away with a lot, but we finally met opposition of this really powerful NPC paladin, Sir Reginald. that she had written all these stats for. She meant it to last long, but through deception, we led Sir Reginald down by a lake, and we pushed him in. And he missed his roll. She rolled, didn't work. So for all his power, he was wearing heavy armor, so he just sank to the bottom. And she looked disbelievingly at the sheet, but she let it happen. She didn't negate our agency. So in that case, the most exciting thing was the anticlimax.
So actually, Joshua, you hit on basically the thesis almost exactly here, right? You had a narrative style where you tried to run the storyline, and your players were looking for, as you were a narrative GM in that first game that you had, your players were looking for a different game. They were looking for a sandbox mode or destruction style, and so the clash was there, right? If you had players that really just wanted to hear the story beats, they might not even noticed or might not have tried to.
Right. If they just wanted to be kind of on a funhouse ride.
Whereas if you, and then on the flip side, you had a GM who was, the exact match for that group and rolled with it. So, there's nothing wrong with narrative styles and storytelling.
Oh, no, yeah. And I've learned to mix them a little bit better now.
Yeah.
Have my story beats, but still give the agency that the players need, and know that different set of rules for running a game as opposed to other storytelling mediums where the anticlimax can be the most.
Yeah, I mean, plus if something is going to go awry and you're going to lose all of this big plot, as long as the players haven't seen it, you can always just hide it and keep it for later.
Right. Well, and I've played enough games. I save everything now. A villain that did not get used in one game, I can use later on in another game or write it into some product or something. But nothing gets wasted. I can kill my darlings a lot more easier.
Excellent. And speaking of killing your darlings, this is a perfect transition to Justin, who has killed many darlings, I imagine, over his years,
and maybe a few not darlings as well. For my part, it was less a question of not heeding the player's agency so much as it was not cultivating the proper environment where I knew what they wanted to do in the first place. And so this was several years ago. It was at the Essenspiele in Germany. I was running a demo game for Vampire. So I already knew that it wasn't going to be a full chronicle length. It was just going to be a single game session. And I really had a kind of a set of notes. There wasn't a huge plot. It was largely driven by, hey, players, what do you want to do? And so I had set up these kind of mood pieces that were ready to go. And it was back when I was laying out some of the groundwork for what ultimately became New York by Night. And so the kind of pivotal super mood setting scene at the beginning is when the vampires come together and they're in the sewer and they're being paged by the prince who is a Nosferatu, and this white alligator, this enormous white alligator, comes swimming down the sewer channel here, and they're supposed to get on his back and be taken to an audience with the prince. And so okay, it's kind of railroady to begin with, but it was a demo game. I figured, all right, we're just trying to give people the flavor of the game here. Unfortunately, I had players who were not necessarily interested in the kind of creepy, moody setting that was being put forward. I had one player who was kind of the archetypal trench coat katana guy. He wanted to be the guy with a sword who fought everything. He was kind of a dark champion superhero in his mind. And I had at the complete other end of the spectrum a player who was in it more for the kind of gothic romance. She had a lover who had died as she had become a vampire, and she had come to her senses, holding him in her arms. And I didn't really have any game content for them to indulge those kind of wants. And everything I had didn't make anybody happy. So additionally, I had made the mistake of allowing the players in this one-shot setting to kind of make their own characters. So it was just a kind of really quick run through character creation. Hey, look, you can be whatever you want as a vampire here. Here's one who wants, classic romance. Here's one who wants more of an underworld style thing. And it all just came together in this completely boring, unexcited for anybody. My fighting player is bored because there's nothing to fight. The romance player is bored because there's no one for her to cry blood tears with. And no one appreciates my marvelous white alligator. And it was all just kind of all for naught, right? And so for a demo game, that really must have been a negative experience for them, or at least one that didn't make them immediately say, oh, I have to have this game. I have to go play this with my friends. So ultimately, I think the disappointment, the failure on my part was not A, controlling their expectations, or B, taking their expectations into account. I could have provided pre-gens, and there's a lot of creative room you get in constraint. If I give you a character and your character has 3 bullet points of things you want to accomplish, there goes back to player agency there. How do I want to accomplish these things? But I didn't take any of that into account, and ultimately, as a welcoming experience, it was just not a positive one for them, I'm sure.
No, and I mean, I've run demo games at cons, and I've written a few of them before, and it's kind of it's a tough market, right? Because you have 4 hours, maybe 2 hours to sell somebody on a product. You have to have a bunch of GMs, a bunch of other storytellers that have to run that content to go out and be able to sell your book. You have to hook players, and so that right there is where you have some players with that when they bring their own characters, they're looking to tell their story, right? So they're uplifting. They want you as a GM to tell their backgrounds and their stories, and then you have this exact narrative structure that you need them to follow in these 4 beats to experience different game mechanics, different spots, see these plots, and get the hook off, or even for a LARP. Now, do you think that pre-gens alone would have solved it, or do you think that there was something else you could have done on the fly, like maybe just chuck out the module and just storytell to those players?
I could have improvised. I don't know if it would have given me a better result there. But one of the things that I found gives really strong results is actually going into it with pre-generated characters. And I started in vampire games. I got back into role-playing after taking a hiatus by getting into it through LARPing. And one of the LARP groups that I played with, when they brought new players in, they would say, write down 3 words for me. Give me 3 adjectives that describe the kind of character you want to play. And so I still, to this day, use that technique that I stole from them. And I kind of, when I do character creation pre-gens, I do a wide variety of things, but they all kind of have goals that are overlapping with one another, or they have secrets, like that this character over here is hiding this secret. Oh, this guy is a Sabbat, get him to expose himself, that sort of thing. So A, it gives them something to do right out of the gate. And B, I try to push them into conflict with one another, which makes my role as the storyteller less focal, and you can start to get to see the relationships of the players in the game. It's not about me telling this marvelous story that other people sit at my feet and enjoy. It's about other people getting to live the vampire experience, or participate in undeath, as it were. So giving them a little bit of stuff to do beforehand that they can think about and get into right away, I think would have been a better solution there. And it's literally the one I use to date. If I'm not running a house game, if I'm running a convention game, it's going to have pre-gens.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, you have to have that narrative backup right there to give them, because you don't have the time to do a session 0, right? You don't have that bandwidth to do it, and you can't see conspiracy in 15, 20 minutes with a bunch of people in a con with loud, noisy rooms.
Exactly. That's the other point is, for a super moody game that I was trying to run to begin with, well, it's being run in, here's some white curtains around me in a giant arena. So there's all the noise from all the other games being demoed, and it just wasn't the proper place for it. That was a botch, as we would say in the storyteller rules.
So it happens. One of the fun experimental GM styles I like seeing is when people will get like the pizza delivery guy to show up and play an NPC to like break that immersion and whatnot. But in cons, or in like public environments, or running in game stores like Adventurers League or things like that, you just don't have the bandwidth to run a game like 10 Candles or these like movie type games. Also, I realized that with this group of panelists, at the end of this panel, I want to come back to this topic about PvP at the table. Because you just touched on it, where you set the players against each other. And I think at a horror group, especially with White Wolf, we should definitely talk about, because in LARPs, as LARPers, we're all used to it. If you've, been around in the LARP community, is we're all used to, that's the game. You're have a little bit of PvP with it. But we're going to come back to the PvP topic later, because I think we can have some good stuff there. So let's go with Jason. You're up. What's your storyteller fail?
When I was a new storyteller, a new GM, I made so many mistakes. I'm astonished that anybody ever played with me ever again. But I think the worst that I made, or the one with the biggest impact on me later as a storyteller, was when I was running a game of Dungeons and Dragons for friends, and I thought that my role as the storyteller, the GM, was to make sure that the players played it as the published adventure laid out. I thought my role was to enforce the story as presented by the author, right? And that any deviation from that adventure was unacceptable. So I used the word no a lot. And I shut down player agency because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. It was a adventure with a climactic battle against a dragon, and in the end, the players were so frustrated by my refusal to allow them to have any agency other than what the published adventure prescribed that one of the players reached out, grabbed the plush dinosaur that I was using as a dragon miniature, just ripped its head off and destroyed that poor innocent plush creature in a fit of frustration and pique. And it was at that moment that I knew, this is probably not the way this experience is supposed to go. And it was a very important lesson for me about the difference between no and yes and the power that they both have. And it was a lesson that has stuck with me all these decades later as a GM and storyteller.
So that no means yeah, or that yes.
Bad for that dinosaur.
How to say yes with boundaries is one of like the most crucial skills for any storyteller to ever have. With like, I want to come. Hey, Jason, I want to come to your game and I want to play a bully, and you're going to be like, ooh, let's.
That's a long, complicated discussion. So I'll just sum up now.
Right.
But instead, I could say yes, but here are some guidelines and guardrails for you. Or I could say yes, and you are also going to do the following 17 things in the story.
Yes.
And in each instance, the yes followed by whatever qualifier you may choose is almost certainly going to create a far more memorable, enjoyable, powerful, and fun experience for everybody, for you, for me, for all the other players at the table or in the LARP. Far more so than any use of the word no would ever conjure. So I say yes whenever I think it's possible. Rarely do I say no outright. There are a couple of occasions where it's okay and appropriate to say no, but those are generally not about agency or narrative.
I mean, there's obviously in horror games, there's consent, there's there's the boundary.
And I'm happy to say that I haven't lost a plush animal since. Well, not to a player anyway.
But no, I'm so glad that you mentioned the no into the yes, because that is a critical aspect. So I got to ask, what happened to that group after the death of the plush dinosaur?
Well, after a fitting period of mourning had passed, we got together again, and the players very graciously explained to me what frustrated them. This entire panel discussion is all about communication, obviously, and setting expectations. And they explained why they were frustrated, what had happened. And I actually sought the advice of a more experienced GM, someone I respected and who had brought me into this wonderful hobby, this wonderful world. And I started over. I asked them to give me another chance. They did. And I promised them that no matter what they proposed, no matter how outlandish their plans might be, I would say yes. And we had a lot more fun, and no plush animals were destroyed.
Well, that is a perfect story. Thank you very much for sharing that, because the idea that you go back, you have this reconvening, you guys ran for a while, and do you guys still play together, or you guys still like?
Oh no, this was I'm like 109 years old, so most of those people are long gone by now.
All right, well, then we're gonna go to Mr. B. Dave Walters. So it is your turn. What do you got for us?
I'm glad I'm last because I have the least fulfilling response to all of this. But before I say my thing, I would just to yes and all of you. Crystal, with your bugbear thing, I absolutely would have presented them that same quandary on purpose just to watch what they did. And then the consequences are what they are.
I'm sorry. So that's kind of why I just kept the consequences, because I was like, well, they could have said something. Yeah. They didn't.
Yeah. They're like, bugbears? I'm like, yeah, bugbears. What are you gonna do? Yeah. Josh, I 100% railroaded people at the beginning way too much, putting the story on rails. Justin, the first character I ever played in a stream ever was a pre-gen that Jason Carl made for me. Stu the Gangrel was a pre-generated character that I did what I did with. And yes, Jason, your plushies have survived because you haven't brought any on set with me. So, you know, I mean, maybe season 5, right? That's true. Beasts we are, sir.
Threat or promise?
Beasts we are.
I think every humanity point.
Where to begin?
For me, believe it or not, I've been racking my brain since you sent us this email, and I can't think of particular terrible times just because that's not how my brain works. I instantly delete sad memories. I could tell you 100 happy stories. I can't think of any sad times. I can think of, I've made every single mistake everyone has mentioned here. I've done all of those things, but I think probably if I had to nail down the thing that I would do wrong the most often, believe it or not, was I would shield characters from the consequences too much early. Like if I rolled and I thought, you know, the monster was hitting them too hard or something, like I would always fudge it. I mean, I'm very much of the opinion, and I posted this meme a little while ago, that the only reason the DM screen exists is for the storyteller to fudge dice in your favor. But I did a little too much of it at first, and what I found is it was making it unfulfilling because there was no stakes. The characters didn't feel like what they did mattered. And it dawned upon me, and it's something that's kind of become my guiding principle in storytelling, is the whole point is the characters want to feel at cause. They want to feel like their actions or their inactions matter. They may be heroic, they may be terrible, they may kill a whole village of bugbears. That's fine as long as it has a meaningful impact at the end of it. So I think when I would say every game before I realized that that's what the players were really looking for could be defined as a failure, probably. Yeah. In addition to literally everything everyone else has said I've done wrong.
Well, I mean, you know, yeah, this idea that you help the players out, right? You know, you have a botch that goes bad that they could have died or something like that, and you wanted to preserve the story, you wanted to make sure that the player does, because there is one thing, right? When you have like really invested players in your game with fantastic backstories, when they die, sometimes integrating a new character into your chronicle can be very difficult, right? And you don't think that character's story is down, and you're as invested in that character as a storyteller, right? So you don't want to kill them off before their time is there. And you know, have you, since you've had this revelation, have you found ways to sort of like fudge the dice, but then still like make some consequences matter, but maybe just not like take the character out of play? Because that's usually what most storytellers are scared of, is they don't want to kill the players. You know, they don't want the TPK, they don't want that death.
My style now is I always make sure there is at least one solution, because I realize the players and the characters will always surprise you. Always, like, you can't account for every variable, but always make sure there's at least one solution. You know, it's like there's a weak spot on the back of the left knee or something, you know, like that I know is there.
Right.
And then I try and come as hard as possible so that people really have to think, and they really have to try, and they really have to work at it. But there's usually still a way out. So it's kind of like, if you get killed, it's because you chose to stay there to the last second, which might be incredibly heroic. It might be incredibly foolish. And then I let the dice decide. It's sort of like, as long as you know the fire exit's over there and the building is very much on fire, whatever happens after this is on you. Yeah. And that works out pretty well, you know. And I will say I do adjust to my players in the sense that if I know I have a very meek, not very combat-y person and another person that is the trench coat katana person, then mysteriously the white alligator has a taste for that guy, you know. The only time I will overtly attack some of the more meek characters is expressly to get an emotional reaction out of everybody else. That when you bite Little Red Riding Hood, that's when the woodsman is like, what? You know? And then everybody's into it. Yeah.
Right. That 100% works. But you also mentioned something very, very, very key in there, which was this idea of, you know, staying to die, even if it was heroic, right? And then when those characters went, they stayed, they died. One thing that I know really works to help bring a lot of life to your game is have funerals for characters that die, show world consequences for people that have moved on. The characters in the sandbox, these moments of time, don't exist in a vacuum. And if you give your players consequence in the world, good or bad, to show that impact that they've had, really matters. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, Dave, with hey, the building's on fire. You could go, you could die heroically, and if you do, well, maybe we'll have a memorial service for you with your next characters, or the ones that you that live will remember that.
But I find though the stories, because again, all of us have our happy stories too. The times that you do stay and the building is on fire and you are going to rescue the kitten, and then you roll the 20 to jump out the window and make it. Those are the things that stick with you literally for the rest of your life, though. Like those are the gaming moments you never forget.
And that, thank you so much, because you just queued up this my tale, my storyteller fuck up entirely. So I have been writing and working to teach kids how to be storytellers. I've been working on this whole thing called the Storytellers Forge. I have like 140 kids signed up in a program at like local game stores out here in like the Chicagoland area, and ages 8 to 16, things like that. And they come, they play on a weekly D&D, and we started off. If you guys are familiar with the RPG Suikoden, like the concept is that they come and they build a small village, and this brass dragon who named Boltius would help guide these characters and go recruit chefs to come to the village, to go out and fight, to bring wizards to them so they could start building up a city. And the kids, as they played through this year-long campaign, would continue building and going on adventures with Boltius the Brass Dragon to keep building the city. And it was a shared collective among the store. So all the different tables, all the different storytellers were all pulling together. We had a big giant map where you could see, the contributions that, these people brought like the Clerics of Lyra in, these people brought in, some rangers that train dire wolves, and eventually the kids' parents would come and they would play pirates to raid the village, and the kids would have to storytell for their parents and defend as their parents played one-shot NPCs attacking the village that the kids sort of collectively built. But each in the Storytellers Forge, this book this campaign that I had written, every adventure taught you how to be a storyteller in some way. But there's still a narrative arc that's going through it, where there's this evil blue dragon named Snooch that is out there and questing to destroy the village and rule all these players. Just archetypical terrible villain. So we get to the end of the year, right? And we're at the end of the year. We have this big store program, and we're running this big epic, and this blue dragon comes down onto the middle of the battlefield and is casting meteor swarms. He's the kids are involved at different tables, all trying to take down basically pylons to weaken his sorcery effects and take down this mega blue dragon. And Boltius, the brass dragon, he steps up to fight him. And in the middle of the scene, the blue dragon just kills Boltius, just rips this brass dragon apart, casts his carcass to the side, and lowers and looks at the players of the town. The game store goes quiet. All of the kids are just, oh, this guy is dead. Like they start playing like Undertale Ballad of a True Hero. They are like super invested. They go take down this brass dragon or blue dragon with a fury that I have never seen before. There was no chatter at the table. Nobody was checking their cell phones. Everybody was emotionally invested. They kill the blue dragon. The village is theirs. All of these kids now have a village that they built that they could go off and be storytellers with in their own world. They have a tale and a backstory to this. And that's not the failure, though. The failure comes later on that day when I find out that some of the kids are crying. And they're really, really sad. And they're really, really sad because Boltius died and didn't know how to resurrect him. And they didn't know that the epilogue, the next campaign, was hey, let's go resurrect and bring Boltius back to life. Let's go find the dragon egg and build the guy up. And so my storyteller fail was sort of leaving a cliffhanger that was absolutely too potent, right there at the end, and also remembering that there is such a thing as emotional bleed when we play games, whether it be in LARPs, whether it be in PvP, whether it be in your friendly table, even those positive moments, a really awesome game, everybody loved it. But there is a connection that you have to your characters, your stories, your things, and when you have, and the kids spark the most purest moment of realizing that emotional bleed, even when we're adults, even if you're 109 years old like Jason, in a game, if he's really invested, he's still going to need that time to decompress. That's what do you guys think I could have done? Any advice for me?
So I would have ended it there and then given talked with everybody at the end of it and given the cliffhanger to the next section. Like give a little tie into the, hey, maybe you find something like a map or some sort of a spell scroll that has something and you see a picture of Boltius on it. So give something to cling to that they can emotionally kind of tie themselves to, that that's still there.
Kind of the happy version of a horror movie's, the end.
Yes.
Or is it?
I think you probably handled it about right by gauging you sort of interacted with the sad kids, because it's just as likely when everybody had that moment, huzzah, we did it. The moment you introduce the other dragon egg, you've now taken that from someone else. Even though the little kids might feel better, the kid who was really glad that they'd avenge their friend might feel worse. So I mean, you probably nailed it right in the middle.
But yeah, well, I mean, we're getting near the end. I thought we would have some time for PvP discussion. I don't know if we will, but I want to do one last thing before we get to that 4 o'clock margin. We give everybody a shot to talk real quick about where people can find you and your shameless plugs, right? What are you working on now, right? So Dave, you're big on my screen right now because of the way Zoom works. So you go first.
I'm big on all screens. I'm freaky ginormous, unfortunately. Yeah, doing a lot of things. I guess right now on Twitter, I'm doing the Anarchs from New York Twitter game where I'm running a play-by-post game that you can come in, vote, give what you think that is steering the narrative, bringing some of those characters and situations to life for a 4-parter for Level Up Dice soon. Long Beach by Night, we're into our epilogues. Epilogue number 2 is going to air on Sunday. And of course, LA by Night, we're going into epilogue 3 next week, I think. You can find me at B. Dave Walters, where I say a lot of words about a lot of things, and I'm on a lot of streams.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your stories, man. Justin?
Right now, what I'm working on is a game that is based on the world of Frank Herbert's Dune. So that's my day job. I'm also active here and there in various tabletop RPG activities, which I occasionally mouth off a little bit on Twitter. And there I'm Jachilli, my first initial, last name.
All right. Thank you very much for your stories, man. And we'll talk more about this PvP stuff elsewhere. So, Joshua?
Yeah, you can find me at Joshua Doetsch on Twitter. JoshuaDoetsch.com is my website, and also a Patreon under that name. Things I'm working on now, I'm working on some unannounced Vampire the Masquerade stuff, some Scarred Lands material, and some ARGs.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I love your story, and we'll catch base more later.
Thanks.
Jason?
You can find me everywhere at Vampires in Vino. Vampires, the letter N, Vino, because that combines 2 things I love. My day job is finding ways to make the world of darkness more accessible to everybody, to make sure that there is something for everyone who loves the world of darkness to do. In between that, I run LA by Night, on Twitch, and a big part of my work now is developing new content to fill that new World of Darkness Twitch channel with.
Thank you very much. And Crystal, where can we find you?
So you can find me at thegeekypanda.com. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at bodyandsoul152. And you can find me on Facebook as well. I'm currently working on finishing up Kid's Guide to Monster Hunting, which is a pip system game. I'm also currently working on Ironbound Adventures, which is a Wicca-based game using pip system. And finishing up my Never Going Home stuff, which is +1 through Wedding Games. So I'm keeping plenty busy.
Excellent. All right. Well, as for me, I'm working on the Red Opera with Diamorte and Apotheosis Studios, which is a 5th edition Warlock themed campaign for like all tiers of play. So we're actually we're done with the writing. We're in production. It's coming out, sometime later this year. And I'm also working on storytelling for kids and continuing to, find ways to, run other V5 or Second Inquisition based chronicles. You can find me on Twitter at CrankyBolt or at Geek and Sundry under the GM tips or author Rick Heinz. So everybody who came onto the panel, thank you so much for sharing your stories. All of them are awesome. I wish we had more time because I think we could easily go and keep talking about more tips. I would love
about our failures.
We've made so many mistakes.
Right, because we learn from our mistakes. And to everybody who was watching, thank you so much for listening to how we've sucked at storytelling horribly and our failures. There are many more topics we could probably cover. And if you find us at a panel or a convention, I will always be trying to grab these guys and throw them on so we could talk about, players who cause fights at your tables. What happens, when LARPs go wrong. There are tons of stories and tons of things that go wrong when we run games, but just remember, communication is key. Talking to your players is there, and remembering the kind of storyteller that you are. It might not be the kind of storyteller that your players are looking for, and that's okay. No way to play the game, as long as you're having fun and everybody is there with their own consent, is wrong. A dungeon crawl can be just as riveting as a narrative conspiracy game with the right group and the right players. So you just got to find that match. To that, thank you everybody for attending Virtual Horror Con.